1963, we had pirate radio, and this was where radio ships would anchor just inside international waters and transmit non-stop 24-hour, pop music and rock and roll across Britain. I mean, Radio Caroline was the first. I forget the year, but it was about 64, I think. Probably about 64. So it took the British government 3.5 years, to recognise there was a demand for pop music, rock and roll music. And that was when Radio 1 started in, I think, about the August 1967. Absolutely incredible. I mean, unlike America, where you have lots of rock channels and country stations and country stations and all kinds of stations, and did do it back in the 50s and 60s. Very different scene.
Yeah, because you gave me that knowledge of the pirate radio boats. I actually just discussed that with a friend of mine not less than a week ago, and I told him what you told me, the story of that, and I'm always diverting the show, and I'm sorry.
No, diversions are always good things. But we do have another birthday on the 23rd of October, 1940. Manfred Mann. He was born Manfred Lubowitz in Johannesburg in South Africa. And he went on to be really quite an important part of the 60s and 70s British scene.
Probably one of the biggest names ever to come out of South Africa in the music scene.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, what's interesting, he met a sort of long-time associate, Mike Hugg, in 1962 at Butlins Holiday Camp in Clacton. I think Mike Hugg was working there. And we probably... In the UK, in the 50s particularly, in the early mid-60s, holiday camps were very popular. If you mention a prison camp, like a big camp with mitten huts and chalets for the sleeping in, and big mass catering halls, and a barbed wire fence around it to keep people out.
The riffraff, keep that riffraff out.
And then you'd have swimming pools. On the upside, you'd have swimming pools and bars and a fairground. And everything was absolutely free. So it was an all-inclusive holiday. And in those days, in the 50s and early 60s, British people very, very rarely went abroad. Well, unless you had a lot of money. But the vast majority of British people holidayed in the UK, in the seaside holiday resorts of the various coastlines of the UK. And it wasn't until the cheap package tours to Spain arrived in the sort of mid-60s, the Brits used to go abroad. So these holiday camps were very, very popular at the time. And Butlins was probably the most famous of them all. But he then formed the Mike Hugg Blues Band, or they did, and they played modern jazz, which is interesting. It gives you a flavour for, particularly when he got into Chapter 3 at the end of the 60s, where he was coming from. Paul Jones, the lead singer, came on board in 63, and that's when they essentially became Manfred Mann. String of hits through from 64 to the end of the decade on both sides of the Atlantic. Then Mike Darbo replaced Paul Jones in 66. So they had a couple of different singers, and the Manfred Mann pop group essentially finished around 69, and Chapter 3 was formed, and Mike Hugg was the drummer with Manfred Mann, but when he formed Chapter 3, he moved over to keyboards, which is quite a rare thing.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em,
because the John LeBang Show will be right back
after this.
That's guaranteed. Yes.
Pane in the Glass, commercial and residential window cleaning for a beautiful sparkling shine that's crystal clear. Call Pane in the Glass Window Cleaning. You can find them on Facebook at Pane in the Glass.
Hey, man, you're listening to the John LeBang Show, man.
That's good, because that means you ain't stupid.
Chris Slade.
Of AC/DC fame and The Firm.
Well, exactly. I mean, happy birthday, Chris Slade. He was born on the 30th of October, 1946. But sort of just before moving on to him, the Manfreds are on tour at the moment. Across the UK, 17th of October to 30th of November. They're pretty much on tour all of the time. But I mean, Chris Slade, what a pedigree, what a guy. Born in Pontypridd, South Wales, which I think is the part of the world that Tom Jones comes from, which is why he was with the Tom Jones Band from 1963 to 69.
It's not unusual to be loved by anyone. I love that tune.
I didn't realize
Tom Jones is a big favorite of mine. Now everybody knows. I kept that secret because it was a secret thing, but now the whole world knows.
The secret's out. Tom Jones is in the house.
Actually, my favorite tune by Tom Jones is "She's a Lady." What a jam!
He's got again. He's one of those guys that it's never really been that cool to be into, but he's always been on the sort of fringes of rock and roll. He's got an unbelievable voice.
Definitely, but we're talking about Chris Slade, not Tom Jones.
And then he was in the Earth Band across the 70s, 71 to 78. Then he was with Uriah Heep for a couple of years, the beginning of the 80s, before he joined the Firm in 84 with Paul Rodgers and Jimmy Page. I mean, what a lineup that would be.
Yeah, that was as all-star of a lineup as you could have ever had. The Firm was just fabulous. I think they did only 1 or 2 albums, maybe?
2, I think.
Yep.
I think 2. But absolutely. And again, if you said, do you like the Firm? Very few people probably have ever heard of the Firm. And then, of course, he was with one of your all-time favourite bands, AC/DC, joined him in time for Razor's Edge in 1990.
Right, he's the drummer on Thunderstruck, which arguably is their most popular song after You Shook Me All Night Long.
Yeah. Oh, he was a good part of that band. And he was on the world tour as well. They did a tour in 1991, and it says on the album, 21 countries. So that's a serious old world tour.
Oh, definitely.
Just called Live. So, some great examples for Chris Slade.
But he wasn't finished with AC/DC because you're going to tell us about the next group he was in.
Well, Asia. Yeah, he went on from AC/DC to Asia for 5 years at the beginning of 2000. And, he's sort of on tour now. It's not really tour as such. He does this sort of retrospective, and there's one date I can find in the diary when he's in Belfast on the 9th of November.
He did tour as well with AC/DC just a few years back when Phil Rudd had his little run-in with the law in, New Zealand. So he played on the tour. If you don't mind, I'm going to diverge into AC/DC just for a moment, because I don't know if you've heard this, Derek, but we reported it this past weekend. Angus was sighted at a recording studio with his nephew Stevie. A week later, there were pictures of Brian Johnson and Phil Rudd at that same studio. But the big news that I reported this weekend is that they're going to be doing an album, and they've got a bunch of pre-recorded stuff that Malcolm had sent Angus throughout the years that they're going to use on the album, in the upcoming album. So we're actually going to have the deceased Malcolm Young on brand new AC/DC stuff, and it looks like it's going to be the primary band playing on that album.
Oh, it'd be brilliant.
Now that I've diverged us, you can continue.
Oh, that's brilliant. The Beatles did the same thing, didn't they, for their anthology? They got some stuff that John Lennon had recorded.
Right, that was Free as a Bird, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Free as a... That was a great little tune.
It was, yeah. Oh, it's great, I think, when you get this stuff coming back from the grave, as it were. It really is good.
Yeah, it gave me, I have to admit, I got goosebumps when I was reading that, and I was like, I can't believe it, because, we had Axl Rose, we had a whole mishmash of musicians carrying that last tour because of all the random things that happened to the band, that rocker bus tour, man. They kind of busted a little bit there, but it looks like they're coming back. And man, I you know me, I'm giddy as a schoolboy right there. I was going to say a schoolgirl, but we don't wear dresses over here.
Oh, right. Oh, it's getting very popular over here. What is that?
Okay, we're up to a birthday's on October 23rd.
Oh, this is an interesting one. This is Happy Birthday, Steve Cropper, Booker T and the MGs. 23rd of October 1941, born in Willow Springs, Missouri. Steve Cropper pops up in the story, but I thought, what a wonderful time to look at the cautionary tale of Stax records, and a pause for thought for anybody who owns a small record label and thinks they've got a great break coming when they do a distribution deal with a big record label. And it all started back in 1959 when a guy called Jim Stewart formed Satellite Records, originally a sort of country label. And in August of 1960, Carla Thomas and Rufus Thomas released a song called 'Cause I Love You on Satellite. And a guy called Buster Williams was a pressing plant operator, and he contacted Jerry Wexler, who was one of the real movers and shakers at Atlantic, and told Jerry Wexler that he got this particular record they were pressing large numbers of and going out on a tiny little label. So Jerry Wexler got in touch with Jim Stewart, and he agreed to lease that particular record just on a handshake. And he then released it on ATCO, which is one of the Atlantic Records labels, and he struck a deal for $5,000 and an option on future Satellite product. And I mean, Jerry Wexler was very impressed with the sort of vibe at Stax Studios, and he actually got lots of his Atlantic artists went to record there. And some of the Atlantic artists, people who actually signed to Atlantic, actually released the material on the Stax label. And Booker T and the MGs became the house band, one of the best house bands of all time. Booker T went on following summer to release Green Onions on Vault, and that found its way onto Stax. But now the story starts to get really interesting. In 1965, Jerry Wexler thought that there was quite a possibility, because Atlantic were a very, very successful label, and he thought that there might be a situation arising where they would be sold, and there was no actual contract with Jim Stewart at Stax. So he advised Jim Stewart to sign up to a proper written contract, which he did.
Without
Jim
reading,
Stewart,
right?
He never read it. That's right. Or he certainly didn't read it thoroughly enough, because he trusted Jerry Wexler implicitly. His word's his bond, as it were. But in '67, Warner's actually took over Atlantic, and the owners, brothers Ahmet and Neshui Ertegun, and Jerry Wexler, the third owner, they have reputedly got $17 million in Warner stocks and very nice jobs out of it. Thank you very much. And Atlantic became part of Warner 7 Arts. But this is where the rub came. When Jim Stewart came to renegotiate his deal with the Atlantic lawyers, he discovered in that 1965 contract, the Atlantic lawyers had put a clause in that said that Stax material released while the distribution deal was on with Atlantic was actually owned by Atlantic. So overnight he discovered he'd got no back catalogue.
So he got no royalties for any of that.
Absolutely. A bit like the Rolling Stones lost all the royalties to their 60s stuff to Alan Klein.
Steve Cropper's on tour, right?
Oh, that's right. If you're in America, 3rd of October to the 2nd of March, he's all over the place. So, I mean, again, he'd be a great person to see. And I think Booker T's on tour. He might have finished his current one, but he's very active as well, out and about.
And everybody can find this stuff on your website.
www.rockandrollunraveled.com.
And you've got a plethora of other social media that you're very active on, including Twitter and Facebook, correct?
Absolutely. Twitter at RNR Unravelled and Facebook at Rock and Roll Unravelled. I think there's a theme developing here, John.
Yeah, Rock and Roll Unravel. That's what's unraveling here.
Exactly.
So Derek, I thank you again for joining me. Next month we have a special broadcast coming with you and I, and that'll be the best frontmen of all time. Holy
Absolutely.
cow. That should be every bit as great as our top 100 albums we did just a few months back. If you didn't hear that, ladies and gentlemen, you can go to either Derek's website or my website and get the archives of that show, because that was 2 hours of incredible rock and roll talk. So until next month, Derek, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you then.
My pleasure, John. Cheers, mate.
10,
Bye-bye.
9, 8, 7, 6,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.